Today's art interview, sponsored by Grows on Main, located at 136 South Main Street in Butler, Pennsylvania. The shop has an inventory of common and rare plants, some you'll not find anywhere else, community-wide. As soon as you walk in, you know you're in a special place. They also have an event space, which holds events like baby showers, bridal showers, birthday parties, and much more. So come on down to Grows on Main, look at some of the wonderful plants they have, and maybe book your event. This is art. I'm Nikki. Joining me today is Ashley. Ashley is an RN, and we are going to talk M.A.T.s. When I got into recovery, I kept hearing this term M.A.T., and I was afraid to ask what it was. But then I finally broke down and asked what it was, and it was medically assisted treatment.
Or therapies, yes.
Oh, or therapies. Okay.
Yep.
That I did not know.
Interchangeable.
Gotta love interchangeable stuff,
Yeah.
like Legos.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
Have you ever stepped on a Lego?
Awful. Yeah. 3 kids. Stepped on my fair share.
Yes, awful. So, what exactly are M.A.T.s? To somebody who has no clue, how would you explain it to them in a nutshell?
Okay, so medication or medically assisted treatment or therapies are medications that are used for people who are entering recovery to help either defer cravings, block opiate or alcohol effects, or potentially both. So these medications are used preferably in combination with another form of recovery and complete abstinence to help the addict maintain sobriety and recovery as they're entering their treatment.
Okay. So are we talking shots, pills, or both, or?
There's even liquid. So there's multiple types. One of the original founders, I guess you could say, of the M.A.T.s was methadone. Methadone is available in a pill or an oral. Some people are familiar with methadone clinics, and that, I'm sorry, I'm saying a lot, but there are a lot of people, especially veterans, is where it kind of really took off like decades ago with these methadone programs, which you can go to the methadone clinics and it is a liquid that is dispensed. Those are government funded programs. It is, as far as I'm aware, the only liquid M.A.T. Then you have pills. You have sublingual dissolving pills, and then you also have tablets. So some of them dissolve under the tongue, which is what sublingual would be, and that is comparable to the Suboxone, which comes in strips and it dissolves on the tongue, or under the tongue would be the Suboxone. They're like a pill, but again, they dissolve. So it's considered sublingual. And then you also have tablets. So those are, again, methadone comes in a tablet form. There's naltrexone only medications named Rivia. So there are, it's very broad, the amount, and they have different purposes, different way that they work. Some are prescribed more for alcohol and you're recovering alcoholic, and others are very specifically driven for opiate recovery.
Okay. Now, I've heard it said, and I do believe that the only two substances that you can die from are alcohol and opioids. Or, I'm sorry, alcohol and benzos. Is that correct?
For the withdrawal, like for
Yes.
detox, correct. Alcohol and benzodiazepines are the two that can be life-threatening when withdrawing and detoxing from them.
So during a detox period of time for somebody, would they be using M.A.T.s a lot of the time or most of the time?
So, no. So when
Okay.
someone, I've worked in both, and I've worked in a detox setting. Typically, when someone comes in with alcohol withdrawal, well, they will be detoxing from alcohol, let's say, a different way to say that. We use medications like Ativan, which is a benzo, but it is controlled dosing as perhaps their blood pressure increases, their heart rate is increasing, and they are having the risk of seizures. That is one of the big things that happens with alcohol withdrawal, especially in the acute period, is you run the risk as the body is like detoxing from that of going into an alcohol induced, not induced from alcohol, withdrawal seizure. So we use benzodiazepines in small monitored doses to kind of keep the body almost like at bay and more in a relaxed state while the patient is going through the withdrawal from that. Similarly, there's other medications like phenobarbital, and that is used for the addict who's coming off of the benzos. Both of those have risk of seizures. Benzos specifically, grand mal seizures. Have you ever heard of DTs?
My grandma had a seizure once. I wonder
Did
if it
she?
was the same.
It could have been alcohol withdrawal, you delirium tremors. It's called tremens, the DTs. A lot of alcoholics you see, they're trying to get sober. They're shaking, they're sweating, they're vomiting. They can have hallucinations. So it is very encouraged for the alcoholic who is wanting to get sober to go into a controlled environment, as well as the addict who is going to come off of benzodiazepines. Both of those can be fatal, doing them in a not controlled environment on your own, if you were to have some of the more serious complications during your withdrawal state. But no, Suboxone, Sublocade, Vivitrol, naltrexone, naltrexone, the different M.A.T.s, those are not used in a detox setting. We preferably start those after the patient is detoxed. The naltrexone or naltrexone, that is a blocking agent. So how those work is they literally bind and to the opiate receptors in the brain, blocking the euphoric side effects of opiates. So if a patient is not far enough detoxed from their opiate drug of choice, whether that be Vicodin, heroin, fentanyl, whatever, and then we give them a Suboxone, Subutex, something like that, what you're doing is you still had positive opiates in your body and in the brain. Then we're trying to put something to bind and compete with those same receptors to block it, causes immediate withdrawal. Immediate opiate withdrawal for that patient. So it is not something that is hence why Narcan works. Narcan is life-saving medication, right? You see that on TV shows and ambulances. Most businesses even have it now, especially in our area. But the way that Narcan works, it is only that blocking agonist. So if someone is overdosed on an opiate, their respirations may have even completely ceased, they are slow or just terribly slowed. You have that person not breathing. It is an oversaturation of the opiates to the brain, central nervous system, to the point that the respiratory system is distressed. It's like all hands down, like we are just not working anymore. There's no cues to take a breath. There's no cues down, for the heart to keep going, and everything, you're overdosing. So when we hit you with that Narcan, or you do the mist up the nose, whoa, you wake up. And often when the person who is in an overdose state is reversed through the Narcan, immediately start vomiting. They're sick, they may be shaking, they start sweating, because it's almost like you just flushed quickly those opiates off of those receptors. Pro, you just woke up and we saved your life. Con, you're immediately ill and in opiate withdrawal, which is a reason why many addicts, when you wake them up from an overdose, they're mad. Oh, why'd you do that? I just wasted all this money. Or they immediately use again, because most opiate addicted addicts, why do they use? They don't want to feel sick, right? The physical dependence. So Again, to answer your question long-windedly, sorry, but no, MATs are not used in the acute detox process.
Okay. You mentioned the methadone as
Mm-hmm.
one of the original ones,
Mm-hmm.
which was one of the questions I wanted to ask about was the history.
Mm-hmm.
So that pretty much answers that that was pretty much the first
Yep.
controlled used MAT being methadone.
Mm-hmm.
What year was that they
I don't
started?
know. I
Okay.
honestly don't
It
remember.
was in the 70s,
I
I
believe
believe.
it was the
Yeah.
70s or 80s, correct.
And since then, I hadn't realized that there were so many things that were considered MATs
Oh, yeah.
until you just explained all that, to be honest.
Well, a lot of them are newer ones. So some of the newest ones are Sublocade and Vivitrol. Those are injectables. It kind of went methadone. Then we got like our naloxone Narcan. Um, and that is a good, and I'll explain that to you, but that blocking agonist, it does really well for the cravings for many people, not all. They've actually recently began using it with alcoholics. You see a lot of recovering alcoholics in inpatient programs that they're taking naltrexone oral tablet form, and they can get Vivitrol. Vivitrol is the injectable form of only that blocking agonist. It lasts for 28 to 30 days, and it helps for a lot of opiate and alcoholics, opiate addicts and alcoholics. It defers cravings for many, not all, um, but it kind of has the same effects for either or, which is cool. So we kind of went to like, we needed that antagonist, which would have been the naloxone, Narcan. We kind of came up with that. That's great. We started saving lives here, and we had that reversal, which was great. And then they implemented, it was studied, and I would say, I mean, the first time I heard of an opiate blocker, they used to do an implant that actually was up in Michigan, is where that started. And it was beads, dissolvable, slowly dissolvable beads that they would put into the hip. It was literally like I mean, not literally, it was an operation under sedation. Um, I personally knew someone who had that done. He was a young man, he was 18, who could not stay sober. He was an IV heroin addict. I was in high school with him. So that was in 2004. And his family took him to Michigan twice, and he had it done.
I haven't heard of that one,
Yep.
so
I
I'm
don't know if it's
guessing that
still,
they're
I don't
still using
think.
it. It's not widely used, evidently.
I don't even know that it's still being used at all. I know that just like with many things, some people metabolized it faster. Other people had site rejection. That was one thing that happened to him. And then there were actually addicts who tried to cut it out. That was another thing.
Oh my.
And so it became, yeah, it was a problem. So, though, the point what I was trying to make to you is, as of 20 years ago, we were already progressing in medicine for different things. They were like, hey, this opiates, like, this is a big problem. Um, and so more things were introduced and, created through medicine. So then you got your synthetic opiate paired with the buprenorphine or naloxone. Those two medications combined is Suboxone. The difference in Suboxone versus just an oral naltrexone, right? Just the blocking agonist, craving curber. You had a synthetic opiate, so to speak, paired with that. So, when it comes to recovery, right, there are multiple paths, I guess you could say, that an addict or an alcoholic may choose to take. Some, want to pursue a 12-step program. Some believe they want to go with a complete abstinence. Other individuals, they feel better doing M.A.T.s or maybe M.A.T.s with a 12-step program. There's a lot of different, it's your journey and what you want to go down. For some addicts who have struggled with 100% abstinence, with really severe cravings, or they have a high frequency of relapse, that is where Suboxone came into the program and was like a game changer. It was fast, it's convenient, You don't have to go to a methadone clinic to get it. It is still controlled and monitored, and it gives you the synthetic opiate paired with the blocking agent. When you're taking that, a lot of addicts report not having the cravings for the opiate because they're getting almost like microdoses of it. Someone who is properly prescribed an appropriate level of Suboxone, they're not scratching, they're not nodding out, they don't feel euphoric or high from that medication, but it takes the edge off, so to speak.
So it makes me wonder, is this something that is controlled by the state or some kind of governmental agency, or is this something that somebody could just go to their doctor and have their doctor prescribe, and they can just do the MAT with a 12-step program if they wished from the comfort of their own home?
Um, Now, yes. There are PCPs even that are doing and prescribing these drugs. Um, Suggestively, I would encourage someone to go through through drug and alcohol first. You get paired up like with the in the residential program that I work for. There are special pharmacies that prescribe these medications. I mean, most of them, like Suboxone, it's at every pharmacy now. It didn't used to be that way, but the Rite Aid, the Walgreens, they carry them now because it's very widely prescribed. It's overprescribed for a lot of people, if you want honesty. Um, but yes, now if you have a history of that, it doesn't have to be for those. Methadone is still government because it's also government funded. So that I think is where the difference can be when it comes to the overseeing. I do know that there are mobile clinics for Vivitrol. Um, I don't know if there's mobile clinics or concierge for, so that's literally traveling nurses, traveling concierge, mobile clinics that you'll see them parked outside of a hospital and they're like, hey, like, come here, we'll give you a month shot and helping people out. There's a lot of funding programs as well because the goal is to get an addict or an alcoholic clean and sober no matter what. So it is way more readily available than it used to be.
So that's the goal. That's the impact that is desired, is to help addicts and alcoholics get off of the substances that they're addicted to.
That's the intended pro.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Now comes the conspiracy part of me that is it's been a curiosity of mine, who is really behind pushing for M.A.T.s. Is it the pharmaceutical companies? Because there's a lot of medications I've seen out there. Let's take Pfizer as a company as an example. They've been in business for how long, and they haven't cured any diseases. There's big money in treating
There's
disease.
big money in
Big
M.A.T.
big money in treating disease, not so much money in curing it. So one of my questions was, is the aim and impact, like, do they align? And because it made me think back about the methadone clinics when people were, you know, the first time I ran across seeing it was in a movie, and I don't remember the movie, but they were talking about going to the methadone clinic, and one of the two of them said, you know, I have to go here for the rest of my life. And I thought, well, what kind of medicine is that if you have to go there the rest of your life? But then back then, I didn't know what it was. After having a conversation with someone, they said they're supposed to wean you down, and eventually the goal is to be off of it. So that confused me because, I mean, if you're going to take an MAT, are you stuck with it for the rest of your life, or are you supposed to wean off of it and then hopefully go on about your life in a better, from a better standpoint? Or is it different for different MATs?
So, with my education on them and my experience working at two, I've worked with two different facilities for drug and alcohol. Um, Again, like this is where I'm educated to this point, so someone could correct me, but my understanding is they're all intended um, to be more of an acute treatment or in addition to a program. Methadone, for example, they start the patient at a low dose until you feel your cravings are subsided or you are not having any amount of withdrawal symptoms. Here's another thing that's interesting to note about methadone, Suboxone, uh, the ones that contain like the synthetic opiate, you can get a tolerance to it, just like you can for street opiates or Vicodin or anything. And then the patient has to take more. You'll see patients there going into like a partial.
Well, isn't that going to defeat the purpose of weaning them off of it then?
Correct. They will get stuck. Like when you just said the methadone, I'll be on it the rest of my life. I worked hand in hand with multiple people who went to the methadone clinics throughout Pittsburgh and Cranberry, started young, not started young, they started on lower doses. They continue to bump you up as long as your drug screen is clear that you're not abusing other drugs, okay, and you're strictly only taking the methadone as prescribed. It's very monitored there. And so, anyways, they start to be a tolerance to it. So part of the screening when they go to get their doses weekly or whatever, are you having this? Vitals are taken, and you will see that the patients actually begin to develop a tolerance because it is still acting the same way. So you could have someone 6 months into methadone who started at 20 and they're now at 60 or even 100 milligrams, especially a pregnant woman during pregnancy. Methadone is encouraged during pregnancy by many obstetricians because it's medically controlled. They know exactly what the baby is getting, so they know exactly what to watch for while the baby's in utero, and they know how to prepare to withdraw that child when it is born. However, what happens with a pregnant woman? They're growing quickly, they're starving all the time, their metabolism's through the roof, the baby takes a lot, and that works with methadone the same way. So you get a lot of pregnant women who their obstetricians, they don't want you shooting heroin or fentanyl, right? We don't want you to overdose, especially for the sake of this child. So they have to move and they'll deliver it. They're at 160 milligrams of methadone. Well, they're not pregnant anymore, but now they're physically dependent upon that level. Methadone is something that it works very different than some of the Suboxones and other M.A.T.s. There, you have to withdraw slowly off of it, and the detox, like withdrawal feeling, can last weeks longer. It is rough. It's some of the worst and long withdrawals I've seen. I mean, it has a longer withdrawal period than fentanyl or heroin. Methadone is rough. So the intent is good, and the intent should be to wean off and use them. I've also met patients that they've been on Suboxone for 4 years. And so there are prescribers out there. There's a lot of money to be made by prescribers for M.A.T.
I'm sure that there are people who used the M.A.T.s successfully, in which they used it only for a short period of time then.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
So there are pros and cons
The facility that I'm at, we do not have a detox. So patients come already detoxed from us, and admission, like lab work, drug testing, and they can quickly begin. So they're already detoxed, and then they can begin Suboxone and some of these other medications to help curb the craving and take the edge off, as well as that blocker that if someone left today and they took 2 Suboxone today at 8 and 5 and they went and shot heroin, you're not going to get the euphoria from that opiate because of the blocking agent, and you're going to immediately withdraw and be hecka sick, like whoa. So that's where it's good for clients who have a high frequency of relapse. If that's in their system, I could be so mad and be like, I'm going to go do this right now. Screw everything. I'm having a terrible day. They're not going to feel that rush of the opiate, the euphoria, and they're going to immediately be withdrawn. So it kind of gives you that pause before the reaction. And then the injectable form of those medications for 28 days, you have that coverage. So 7 days in, if you're like, screw this, I just got paid, I'm having a bad day, I'm done with this. Well, okay, buddy, but that medication is still in your system. You got 3 more weeks. So that is the long term. Those are great about the injectables for the patient maybe who's going to be like, I'm not taking this medicine then today because I want to get high tonight or tomorrow. So that was where those came out, and they've been amazing for people. But it's kind of with anything, right? If there's an addictive potential to it, if there is a high reward for a prescriber or an insurance company, in many residential treatment facilities, the facility gets paid more for the patient that's on M.A.T. compared to a patient that is not, because they can bill higher to the insurance company for having an M.A.T. patient versus just a strictly drug and alcohol residential. So when you hear that, I know the last time I worked at a drug and alcohol facility was, I don't know what, 11 years ago. There was not M.A.T.s. You only saw these things being used right in the very beginning process to help people. And what was promoted then was 12-step program and complete abstinence for long-term recovery statistics. What you see with M.A.T. is people get stuck in the trap of M.A.T.s. So even if they're taking it for 6 months, they wean off, and the doctor's, congrats, you have 6 months clean and sober, you're going to be amazing. Some people accuse M.A.T.s of being a crutch. They weren't having cravings. Maybe they didn't get as involved in a 12-step program or not go to one at all because they were feeling great. So then you have this individual 6 months later who comes off of the M.A.T. and now the cravings return. They didn't develop the coping skills for the feelings and the cravings because the medicine kept them great. Well, you remove the medication, they relapse because they don't have the skills to stay clean and sober.
Is there enough data out there to state whether or not it is beneficial or it's not beneficial, or is the jury still out on that? Do you happen to know?
I do not know exact numbers, but I will tell you it's also very subjective. There are, just like with lots of things, right? Even like politics, there are studies and research and statistics very supportive of M.A.T.s, and those say it's amazing. And it does decrease the risk of overdose in the acute period. It's very hard to overdose if you have a blocker. But then there's other studies and research.
Yeah.
Let's look at the long term. How many of those patients went back to using or became addicted to the M.A.T. and they get stuck in the M.A.T. cycle?
And sometimes you have to wonder, how reliable is the data?
Correct.
Because I remember when the doctors and the lawyers were stating that smoking cigarettes weren't harmful. The studies proved it. So I, I do know that there are facilities naturally that do use M.A.T.s. There are holistic ones that will not use M.A.T.s.
Hmm.
And I know that I've heard success stories from both. So I guess it's just the individual's choice as to what path they want to take at this point.
I truly believe um, working with these patients and individuals, as well as, personal experiences, MAT or not, your long term recovery comes down to how bad do you want to change and your will to stay clean, your drive to stay clean no matter what. Um, I've met many people who were on methadone, weaned off, and they have 7 years sober now, 7 years clean. People who've used Suboxone even the first year while they were going through halfway houses, 3/4 way houses. And now, they're multiple years clean and they're completely abstinent. I do believe the goal with all of it is not to be on them the rest of your life, like how you said. But there are people that get stuck. You also hear the term like institutionalized. That's kind of what happens with this medication. Is it can happen. Some individuals feel like it's the only way they can stay clean is if they have that in their system.
So it's one thing to be mindful of and think about, if you're going to make that choice to use M.A.T.s. Wow, this was really informative, more informative than what I thought it was going to be initially.
Yay, that's good. I'm glad.
I appreciate you sitting with us and
For sure.
giving us this rundown. Do you have any final thoughts or anything you'd like to add that we may not have covered about it?
I don't think so. I ultimately think that my total walk away on the M.A.T.s is it can be a very useful tool. I think that's how it should be used, as a tool. Um, but my hope for anyone who chooses to use them is that they still work a program of recovery and develop coping skills. I mean, you have to think too, what if you lost your insurance? Like, there's other things. What if your funding is cut on that medication? No medication is a cure-all, fix-all. So that would be my only takeaway. Is I think these are amazing tools and they save many lives. They do. They absolutely do. But it's not the equal sign to recovery. It's a tool and does amazing with inner self work, coping skills, and hopefully a program of recovery as well.
That's my belief. All right. Well, again, thanks for joining
having
us.
me.
And don't forget to follow us on YouTube, youtube.com/at any recovery topic is art. And also on the Facebook page, give us a like. Any recovery topic is art.